Yes, it's back to Greenelm station again. In my last video I mentioned that my next endeavor would be to establish a tunnel at this end of the layout. I'm doing that now, it's in progress. I've been working on it in different parts and I'll show you how I'm doing it. So the first thing to do is to get the exact shape of the supporting parts that have to be under the tunnel. So I take pieces of paper and just trace the lines of the rails so that I can figure out exactly how to cut out the supports. And this of course has to be done all the way behind and in front of the rails where the tunnel is going to be placed. Once I have drawn these lines, I take the paper onto the cutting board and carefully cut out exactly the shapes that I'm going to use. I then pick up my trusty old sheets of insulation for parquet floors. It is cheap and easy to work with and very suitable for these kind of supports. There are many other ways to do it, I'm sure, but I find that this was both easy and cheap. So I carefully cut out the shapes in accordance with the drawings I made on paper. Once they are all cut out, I carefully glue them together with the white wood glue, the only kind of glue that doesn't damage it. I reckoned that I needed a total of 12 layers of the insulation foam in order to reach the right height. So here comes the gluing. I realized that some of the bits were not exactly the right shape, so I had to recut the triangles, but that was easily done. Then I turned to the more tedious task of preparing the supporting wall, and to do that I followed the good advice from Märklin of Sweden of taking some of this insulation and carefully cutting out the shapes of stones on the wall. It is a fiddly job, it takes a bit of time, but it pays off. Of course you can buy ready-made wall supports, but why should you when you can actually make them yourself? And once that was done, I tried to put them in place and test that the trains could actually go through the tunnel. So here we go, in all the different entries and directions. These tunnel portals are Metcalfe units, and they are supposed to be for 2 tracks in scale. I find that they are very narrow, and there certainly wouldn't be room for catenaries in it. So anyway, I don't use catenaries. So I tested them and also tested with the rail bus. Yeah, everything is working. Now to paint the supporting walls, I use a mixture of white acrylic paint And I'm afraid I used all that was left in my little tube. And I mix it with black and burnt umber. Once I got the right kind of color that I wanted, I start painting those bits of wall that I had carefully prepared. First I gave a horizontal layer, and then it occurred to me that if you're going to see stripes of dirt coming down with the rain, the stripes have to be vertical, not horizontal. So I recovered it all with vertical stripes. And when all that was done, then nothing to do but let it dry. So before I proceed, I will give the top a covering base of the favorite chocolate wish. This has the advantage of looking a bit like earth if it shows through the grass. And if I decide to build a little hill on top of it, it's still easy to use for gluing on or painting. I think I'll have to establish a footpath from the Højby station onto here, and then make a little pedestrian crossing of the rails somewhere here about. Not quite sure how I'm going to do that, but I'll think about it. So after painting this, I decided that I would after all would like to have a little hill on top of this area. So again, I cut out shapes of the insulating material for parquet flooring in ever smaller circles. And then I made a mixture of white glue and water, about 4 parts of water to 1 part of white glue. And based on the good advice from Märklin of Sweden, I started to water down some pieces of kitchen paper with this glue mix and placing them on top of the hill structure. One layer is not enough, but one after the next, and then give it another little watering down with the glue mix. Eventually I felt that I ended up with the kind of shape that I would like to use. Now just let it dry. So now it's the next morning and the paper is dry. So now is the time to trim it a bit. And I think it's now time to place it on the board. So here it goes. Now I need to get the sides down properly. And I think I'll do that with using the brown paint. So here's again the chocolate wish. have to be careful not to drip any paint on the rails. Right, while the paint is still wet, I think I'll attach some more kitchen paper. And I'll give it another cover. When that is dry, I shall carefully cut off the superfluous edges, and then it's ready to be covered with static grass. And while the hill is drying, I'm going to put the final touches on the supporting wall. And to do that, I have to take a bit of the black paint, which is hidden down here. There we are. And some water. Let's see if this is going to be enough. I want it rather runny. I think this will do. Let's try on this piece. Might be a bit too much color, not enough water. No, I think it'll do. Let's see if I gently put it down here for a moment. No, that was not a good idea. This looks better. There you go, that's quite good. So let's try here. The purpose, of course, is not to make the wall black, but to let the black color enter the grooves between the stones to give some emphasis to the structure. So, just trying to remove some of the excess paint here. It's beginning to look quite good. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Right, I left it for 2 days for the paint to dry, and it is dry now. So now I'll start by fixing this supporting wall with good old wood glue. Ideally, of course, you should put it under pressure, but it's a bit difficult to put pressure on a vertical wall. But what I can do is to fix it with a couple of small pins. Yeah, I think that should be enough. Now, to get this wall in place, I will need to adjust the edge here, and for that I use what you would call the sharpest knife in the drawer. There we go, need a bit of paint. I use different mixes of the static grass in order to give the different textures that you will find at the top of the hill and at the lower sides of the hill. And then establish the footpath from the Højby station up to the hill. And cover it with a fine sand from the Sahara. After that, the covering with static grass can be completed, and in good old Danish tradition there is a burial place from the Stone Age. So, to finish off, a few ideas of what the whole layout now looks like. When I first started working on this model railway, I was mostly interested in the electronics, how to get the DCC to work. And I thought, well, the landscaping, that doesn't really interest me. And now I've more or less finished doing the landscaping, and I haven't been looking at the electronics for quite a while. So now I will turn back to looking at how I get everything to work as it should. All the points, all the engines, and then perhaps one day I'll do some more details on the landscape, such as street lamps and road signs. But for the moment, it's back to the electronics.